welcome to Jay Coletti's Racket Reviews. My name is Jay Coletti, and I will be your hostess. Here on Racket Reviews, we are dedicated to learning about all things organized crime, and I'm really looking forward to another individual study with you today, focused on one of the Chicago outfit's more controversial bosses, Frank Nitti. Nitti was Capone's cousin and successor, and he was boss during the Great Depression and the Second World War. Despite a promising criminal career as a young man, Nitti ended up having tons of issues when he was boss, and we have so much to discuss today, so let's get right to it. Francesco Raffaele Nitti, unlike many of the early first-generation American mobsters, was not Sicilian. He was born in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius in a town called Angri, just 5 miles from Pompeii. Angri was also the town of Al Capone's parents. In fact, Nitti and Al Capone were first cousins. The date of Nitti's birth is contested, and there are questions about the accuracy of his headstone. Most reports maintain that he was born on January 27, 1886, as this was the birth date listed on his draft registration card. His headstone says 1888, and other reports have him born as early as 1881 or as late as 1896. It's sort of funny how little we often know about the birth of these early mobsters. Apparently documentation was not the priority that it is today. For our purposes and on Racket Reviews, since there seems to be a consensus, we're sticking with the 1886 story. Nitti was the second child of Luigi and Rosina Nitti. Their first child was a girl named Giovannina Nitti. When Frank Nitti was very young, in 1888, his father died. His mother remarried a man named Francesco Dolindo. The couple would have 2 children together, but the children would not survive. By 1890, Dolindo headed to the United States. Rosina, Giovannina, and Frank Nitti would follow Dolindo to the United States in 1893, settling in Navy Street, Brooklyn. Frank Nitti only referred to himself with his legal surname Nitti. It was the police, the media, and mobsters who did not know him very well who would refer to him as Frank Nitti, but since that's how we have come to know him, I will still be referring to him as Nitti in this video. I just want you to know that he wouldn't have liked it very much. While in the US, Francesco and Rosina Dolindo would have 2 more children, Raphael and Gennaro, born in 1894 and 1896 respectively. Nitti had a challenging relationship with his stepfather and was working odd jobs at a young age to not only help support a growing family, but it seems to me as a way to gain independence in preparation of leaving his stepfather's home. His 15-year-old sister had already left when she married a 24-year-old man. Nitti's odd jobs included bowling alley pin setter and factory worker. Frank Nitti would work and attend public school until he was 13 years old, at which point he dropped out and continued working, eventually getting a job as a barber. In what would be the final step of independence from his stepfather, Nitti joined up with his cousins, the Capone brothers, in the criminal gang the Navy Street Boys, leaving the Dolindo home for good in 1900. It's interesting to note here that the Navy Street Boys were not a Cosa Nostra crew. The Navy Street Boys were a Neapolitan Camorra crew, which makes sense given the Capone's family originating from Nitti's birthplace of Angri in the Camorra region. There's a little bit of lost history after Nitti joins with the Navy Street Boys, but I believe I have enough here to fill in the gaps for you. Nitti worked with the Navy Street Boys in addition to his legal occupations. He would leave Brooklyn sometime between 1910 to 1913. There seems to be some evidence to suggest that he worked in Williamsburg, Brooklyn for a short time during this period, but he left the Navy Street area and crew. He moved to Chicago around 1913, finding work as a barber before working full-time in organized crime with Alex Louis Greenberg and Dean O'Banion. He was a jewel thief, liquor smuggler, and fence, or middleman between the thief and the consumer of the stolen goods. But like many Italian mobsters during this era, he was not necessarily associated with one family. He was a free agent, going from boss to boss and customer to customer. Nitti would be married 3 times in his life. First, to a native Chicagoan he married in Dallas, Texas, on October 18, 1917, Rosa Levitt. Due to this Texas connection, it is widely accepted that Nitti was involved with the Galveston crime syndicate, then run by Jack Johnny Nouns. This island city in Texas was a popular tourist destination in the 19th century, but its profitability wavered after a horrible hurricane struck the area in 1900. By the 19-teens, when Nitti would allegedly have been involved with the crime syndicate, the island was successfully rebuilding and beginning to regain its former popularity. In 1918, according to the Galveston journalist Alan Waldman, Nitti stole $24,000 from Nouns and his partner Dutch Voigt, then returned to Chicago with his wife, where he would pick up where he left off with O'Banion and Greenberg. It was because of Nitti's work in smuggling that Johnny Torrio, the Chicago outfit or South Side boss at the time, noticed him. In addition to Nitti's skill as a smuggler, he was later recognized for his ability as an accountant. It probably helped Nitti as well that Torrio's underboss, Al Capone, recognized Nitti as a first cousin and member of the Navy Street Gang. Nitti began working for Torrio under Capone. Following the murder of his former employer Dean O'Banion in 1924, Chicago became a gangland battleground. After Torrio survived an assassination attempt and retired from the rackets in 1925, Al Capone took over as boss, and Nitti became the outfit's number 2. Nitti was known as Al Capone's enforcer, which is how he got his nickname. But he was not a Capone hitman in the sense of Jack McGurn, for example. On the contrary, he barely worked in the business of enforcement at all. In fact, Nitti was no fan of Jack McGurn or men like him, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in this episode. The role of Capone's enforcer was more like the traditional underboss in the Cosa Nostra structure. Nitti passed word along from Capone to his men about who was to be taken out and how it was to be done correctly. There's really no evidence to suggest that Nitti had ever killed anyone himself. As we'll see later, Nitti was a fussy perfectionist who hated getting his own hands dirty. Nitti is credited with orchestrating the hit on the only man Capone ever feared and O'Banion Northside's successor, Jaime Weiss. As this was still the Prohibition era, Nitti was also tasked with growing the outfit's whiskey smuggling and distribution operations, getting whiskey from Canada and selling it in Chicago speakeasies. And since I know you're dying for a conclusion on the Galveston story, Nitti would later return to Texas and visit a Houston speakeasy, wherein he would be spotted by Nouns and Voigt. They would bring him back to their home turf of Galveston and discuss repayment over a plate of spaghetti on Seawall Boulevard. Nitti would take the train back to Chicago after repaying the $24,000 with interest. Another role that Nitti played under Capone's headship was that of the outfit liaison to the Unione Siciliana, an Italian-American brotherhood or secret society that controlled the Italian vote in Chicago and would be used often by the outfit for political extortion. Nitti and his wife Rosa Levitt divorced in 1928, and in that same year, Nitti married the woman whom historians believe to be the love of his life, Anna Ronga. Ronga was Nitti's former neighbor, and it can be assumed Gumar, and daughter of a mob doctor. The two would adopt their son Joseph from the Tennessee Children's Home Society. Joseph was Nitti's only child, leading many to believe that Nitti could not have children naturally. To Anna and Joe, it seems that Nitti was a devoted family man. Nitti's methodical and careful nature really balanced Al Capone's more outgoing and media don type personality. When Al Capone was sent to jail for a short time in 1929 for contempt of court by feigning illness to avoid appearing before a federal grand jury, he placed Nitti as the head of operations, Jake Usick was placed as head of the administration, and the young Tony Accardo was placed as head of enforcement. Capone would be released upon paying a $5,000 bail in March of 1929, but his reign in Chicago would slip through his fingers. Within 2 months, he was arrested in Philadelphia for carrying a concealed weapon. He would serve 1 year behind bars. In 1930, Nitti was indicted for tax evasion charges. He fled to Italy. Actually, it seems that he fled to Florida to spend as much of his money as possible to avoid charges. He was caught and arrested by law enforcement in 1930. This is a fun fact. In his arrest photo, you'll notice that Nitti is sporting a mustache. This was actually very short-lived because people made fun of him for it. It has been reported that one of his friends handed him some money and joked, "Go buy a monkey, you look like a organ grinder just off the boat." Upon Capone's release in 1931, he was then tried and convicted for his contempt of court charge and would be sentenced to 6 months in jail. Then, of course, the IRS got involved, and on October 24th, 1931, Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison for tax fraud and was sent to Alcatraz. Also convicted of tax fraud was Frank Nitti. He was sentenced to 18 months for failing to pay income taxes in the years of 1925, 1926, and 1927, totaling a debt of $277,000, and was sent to the United States Penitentiary Leavenworth in Leavenworth, Kansas, a much more standard sentence for this type of crime. Upon his release, it was reported and widely accepted that Nitti became the new boss of the outfit. There is much speculation, however, that Paul Ricca, Nitti's successor, actually controlled the outfit after Capone, and that Nitti was simply a front boss. To be fair to the theory that Ricca was boss all along, Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky are reported to have worked directly with Ricca in all things related to the National Crime Syndicate. But this is said to have been per Nitti's orders to avoid violating parole. It also seems that Capone intentionally held up the start of his prison sentence for over a year, with several appeals which his lawyers knew would never stick, so that Nitti, his personal choice as successor, could step into the role of boss after his release from the 18-month sentence in prison. Speaking of Nitti's time in prison, it is reported that he struggled with crippling claustrophobia, and his time in a jail cell was a living nightmare. Paul Ricca and Tony Accardo seem to be the masterminds behind the outfit's strategies, leaving Nitti as more of an operations manager rather than the heart and soul of the outfit, the way Capone was. Ricca and Accardo were known to have overridden many of Nitti's decisions. This should not be taken to mean that Nitti did not wield enormous power and could not change the direction of the outfit. Nitti came into power at a bad time, both in terms of his eager underlings and the world economy. As the lucrative Prohibition era came to a close and the Great Depression began rearing its ugly head, Nitti had to make cuts. He trimmed the crew down from 1,000 members to 500. He happily cut Jack McGurn, of whom it is believed Nitti was jealous due to his relationship with Capone, and gunmen like him from the payroll. Hits were to be contracted out of Detroit or New York for $3,000 apiece, meaning that the rates of murders and gangland violence under Nitti's rule decreased. On December 19, 1932, while Nitti was working in his office in room 554 at 221 North LaSalle Street in Chicago, a police raid, led by Harry Lang and Harry Miller, burst in. Nitti was shot 3 times in the back and neck. Officer Lang shot himself, causing a flesh wound, to claim that the shooting was in self-defense. In later testimony, Miller testified that Lang had received $15,000 to kill Nitti. It also came out that Nitti was unarmed. Many believe that the officers were acting on behalf of the new mayor, Anton Cermak, who did not like Nitti because he wouldn't give him everything that he wanted. Again, Nitti was changing the outfit into a much subtler operation, and Cermak wanted more for his corruption. He wanted men like Edward Teddy Newberry in charge instead, a man with whom Nitti did not get along. Newberry was a Northside kingpin who had an on-again, off-again working relationship with Capone during the Prohibition era. In fact, after the St. Valentine's Day massacre, Newberry had switched to Capone's side, and Big Al even recognized him as the Northside boss, giving him the gift of a diamond-studded belt buckle, a gift he gave to many of his friends, many of whom seemed to die under tragic circumstances. In the police raid, the officers were supposed to have murdered Nitti, but only injured him. Eventually, Nitti recovered, and this reportedly added to his underworld credibility and legend. 3 weeks after his recovery, Newberry's body was found alongside a quiet road in Chesterton, Indiana, on January 8, 1933. He had been wearing the Capone belt buckle. Nitti was cautious. He opted into safer business ventures such as union racketeering, gambling, and Hollywood movie studio extortion. While the outfit still pushed alcohol, now legal, through illegal means, such as bartender unions to avoid paying taxes, Nitti had cut the outfit out of the businesses of prostitution and narcotics. In fact, it would be a death sentence under Nitti to be found working in the drug trade. Later, as Ricca and Accardo's stars continued to rise, Nitti would be the boss during the beginnings of the outfit's involvement in Las Vegas. But Nitti's pet project was the extortion of the Hollywood studios, including Columbia Pictures, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Paramount Pictures, RKO Pictures, and 20th Century Fox. He made a fortune doing this. Many studios didn't mind writing off some money to avoid union troubles. Unfortunately for Nitti, when his 2 extortionists, Willie Buyoff and George Brown, began drawing unwanted attention to the con by living extravagant lifestyles, law enforcement got involved. Jake Usick recommended Buyoff to Frank Nitti, who assigned Buyoff as George Brown's muscle power. Brown was the mob's local union power pick to become president of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees and Motion Picture Operators. Buyoff and Brown both became informants and fessed up to the whole scheme in exchange for lighter prison sentences. Nitti and his men were charged for the $2,500,000 extortion of the motion picture producers. Paul Ricca was involved in the Hollywood extortion scheme, so was Johnny Roselli, but Ricca insisted, nay, threatened, that Nitti would take the fall for all of them because this was his idea. Nitti's wife Anna died on November 19, 1940 at Mercy Hospital in Chicago of an unspecified internal ailment. He was devastated. Many believe that he never recovered from this heartbreak. He would go on to marry Antoinette Caravetta on May 14, 1942, but it seemed more a marriage of company than of true love. To make matters worse, law enforcement was closing in on his movie studio rackets, and he was losing support from the outfit associates. It's also reported that he had ulcers and may have been diagnosed with cancer as well. In a sit-down with his men, it is reported that Ricca reamed him out unmercifully, blaming him for the whole Hollywood scheme and trusting Buyoff. Ricca insisted that Nitti should take the fall for the whole crew, as they had let him be in charge. Nitti was shocked by this treatment and disregard for all of the good that he had done to keep the outfit afloat amidst so many legal troubles, the Great Depression, and the ongoing World War. He felt alone and terrified at the prospect of spending his remaining years suffering a claustrophobic nightmare in a confined jail cell. Nitti wanted out of all of it, so he took matters into his own hands. On March 19, 1943, around lunchtime, Nitti's lawyer called to inform him that he and 6 of his men had been indicted for extortion and mail fraud in New York. Nitti is reported to have said, "Okay, thanks. I'll be down to your office this afternoon," before making the decision to deny the justice system the opportunity to convict him. After eating lunch with his wife, he told her, "I want you to go to the church this afternoon. I want you to go to a novena at Our Lady of Sorrows." By the way, a novena prayer is a practice mostly in the Catholic tradition in which one prays consistently at the same time each day over a particular topic for 9 days. Some traditions may even have the prayer for 9 weeks. Antoinette listened to her husband and left the house at 1:15 p.m. Nitti went to the liquor cabinet and drank himself into a stupor. He loaded a .32 caliber revolver, placed it in his coat pocket, and walked to the railway yard about a mile from his home. He was spotted by 2 railway workers, William Seabauer and Lowell Barnett, who claimed to see Nitti stumbling across the tracks. Barnett told police there was nobody around and this fellow was half sitting and half lying against the fence. The gun was in his right hand. Nitti would shoot the gun 2 times before he, according to Barnett, raised himself to the sitting position, put the gun to his head, and pulled the trigger. There was a shot, and the man fell back against the fence. When Antoinette returned home at 3:30, Nitti was gone, but she wasn't concerned because he frequently went for long walks around the neighborhood. Francesco Raffaele Nitti was buried, after much controversy due to the cause of death being suicide, at the Catholic Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Racket Reviews discussing the Chicago outfit's controversial boss, Frank Nitti. Nitti was always careful, but always seemed to be just outside the realm of success. He came into power just after Prohibition, his marriages struggled, and his underlings were disobedient. Make sure to let me know in the comment section below or on Facebook and Twitter if you think Nitti was actually the outfit boss. There is a lot of debate about who was boss, Ricca or Nitti. Let me know what you think. Also, don't forget to utilize the comment section or social media to let me know who you would like to see covered next. I always love hearing from you, and I'm always happy to investigate. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click notifications to get more Mafia content sent directly to your sub box. Ciao!